working class people don't trust politicians, and it's for a really good reason. You have to give people a reason to trust you before you ask for their vote. Twice now, Labour have been beaten into third by a more progressive and less established option. This whole strategy of punch left, and this is what Starmer's been doing since becoming Labour leader. If you don't like it, there's the door. Well, people will take that door. Politics has never really been safe. What is certainly up for grabs is the potentially permanent destruction of a two-party duopoly in Westminster. And it may have already happened. It may have already happened.
Ash Sarkar, welcome to PoliticsJOE.
Thank you so much for having me. It's like rival media companies as well.
Oh, I wouldn't call it rival at all. It's a friendly rival.
You're going to be like, you're not our fucking rival.
Look, it's nice to have somebody to base yourselves off or to use as like a sounding board for things every now and again.
I think it's one of those things where if you're one of the few left after the bonfire of the VC funded ones, you're you feel like survivors of an old war.
Yeah, the dying embers of the independent left media.
Dying embers.
But we...
Thriving embers.
Thriving, yeah. Thriving. It's like the phoenix has gone, but it will rebirth itself. Possibly.
That metaphor was so tortured, it's like a breach of the Geneva Conventions. Screaming.
Horrible. We're here to talk about the paperback of your book, Minority Rule. A fantastic read.
Thank you.
Anybody who hasn't read it should definitely pick it up. But before we go into it, how would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Ash Sarkar, contributing editor at Novara Media. 5'2", cute face, chubby waist, thick thighs, in shape. That's always the one that I go for.
Do you say that every time you're on PoliticsJOE?
Every time. Every time anyone asks me how I want to be introduced, because my mind goes blank when I think about what are the other things that you ordinarily say.
Yeah.
And I did ask someone to say that when they were introing me on stage, and they just refused. I was like, cowards.
I'll do it myself. We are, as I said, here about Minority Rule. Before we get into the ins and outs of it, I think it would be remiss to not talk about the woke Sharia that's descended on Gorton and Denton in the last week.
The newest member of the Caliphate, welcome.
What are your, just in terms of how you prescribe, or you offer a description of the contemporary left in the book, how does that contrast with the victory for the Greens last week?
Well, I don't think that it does necessarily offer a huge contrast, because if you think about what I'm writing in the afterword, which is what is a winning strategy for the left, going really, really hard on material issues, worked for the Greens. Now, everyone is interpreting Gorton and Denton through the lens of ethnicity and religion. And I'm not saying that the Muslim vote wasn't important, but we don't have ward-by-ward data. So you actually can't see where the Labour vote held up and where it broke down, and we're all making certain assumptions. What we do know about how the Greens campaigned in Gorton and Denton is that they went really, really hard on cost of living, litter, the state of the local high street. Of course, Gaza was in there, and also trying to galvanise an anti-reform vote. It brought all of those things together, and I highly doubt that it was just Muslims deserting Labour. I highly, highly doubt that. And from what I've been hearing about people who were out there and canvassing and on the doorstep, the complexion of a Green voter was sometimes really unexpected. So you'd go knocking on someone's door, you'd see a bald white guy and be like, hey, reform, nailed on. And they'd be like, yeah, man, I like Hannah Spencer, I'm voting Green. And meanwhile you would meet a working class Muslim family, 100% nailed on Green over Gaza. And they'd be like, no, I'm sticking with Labour. It doesn't seem to me that the media narrative, which is overly simplistic, is necessarily what was going on there. There's a way in which people like to understand politics through the lens of, who's the illegitimate minority that's, trying to take over in some way. That's part of the thesis of Minority Rule. And that has just been superimposed on what was likely to be quite complex. Mm-hmm.
We talk about the kind of, as you say, the word-by-word data isn't there. There's an assumption of it being this sectarian thing, right? But in simple terms, you look at the swing from Labour to Green, and it does seem to the general viewer of a by-election that the Labour Party was not trusted as the party to keep reform out?
Well, there's a really interesting thing, right? Because you can look at the results as left versus right, and you can also look at the results as insurgent versus establishment. So if you combine the Green Reform vote, and there were also voters who were Green Reform curious, like lots of people I know who are canvassing were reporting that back from the doorstep, is that that's something like 60+%. And then the established parties, Labour and the Tories combined, that's like 20-something%. So that's another way of looking at it, which is there is this huge feeling of disaffection and anger with the status quo. And Labour and the Conservatives are being lumped in together as representing that. In terms of being able to galvanise the reform vote, the anti-reform vote, sorry. I mean, you had a practice round in the Caerphilly by-election, and people tried to go, okay, well, it's a weirdly shaped constituency. It's a Senedd by-election. It's not quite the same as a Westminster one, blah, 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 blah. But Plaid stormed it. And it wasn't just Labour being beaten into third. I mean, the Labour vote completely collapsed. They ended up with something like 3,000 votes. Whereas in Gorton and Denton, there wasn't a lot between Labour and Reform. But that narrative that I think the party were really hoping would be their big sell for 2029 of only Labour can beat Reform, twice now. I mean, I feel like Pep Guardiola, like twice. But twice, Labour have been beaten into third by a more progressive and less established option.
So talk to me about the anger bubbling under that then, where the Labour Party have been in for a year and a half now.
Longest year and a half ever.
It doesn't feel like it at all, does it? But the part of this being where Labour will campaign on, well, we've brought in this to be better off for, say, young families. We're working on employment rights bill. We're working on workers' rights, this kind of thing. The kind of Bidenification of it, where it's like, well, we've got growth, so you should be voting for me. How do you prescribe the kind of downfall of Labour since they've gotten into power, where there's been so many kind of tests of their popularity, and they've failed every single one of them?
I mean, so the first thing is that it was obvious from the start that they would have to work really, really hard to shore up some kind of popular support behind their parliamentary majority, because they got this huge Commons majority on the basis of fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn got in 2019, which is sort of considered the, annus horribilis of the Labour Party. So I'm not a fancy big city strategist, but even I can see, okay, you're going to have to work really, really hard there. So what you want are some big wins, a big narrative, and you want to use that parliamentary majority to kind of pick a fight with the markets and pick a fight with sections of capital. Because you can go, we've got a mandate, you guys don't, nobody elected you, we're going to do some stuff. So front load some of the pain, front load the big fight, and do it at a time where your democratic legitimacy and your popularity is as high as ever going to be. Labour didn't do that. Instead, they came in, and sure, there's been some, there was the early attempt to settle public sector pay disputes. I thought that was actually going to be much better than it turned out to be. But then there were all these other occasions where Labour were basically saying, go fuck yourself. And they were saying, go fuck yourself to various bits of their coalition. So first it was the means testing of winter fuel allowance. Don't go for pensioners. Like, these people vote. They've got nothing else to do, right? Like, they're at the polling stations. You don't go for a high turnout and also low loyalty group of people like home-owning pensioners. What are you thinking? So that's the first thing. The second thing is this whole strategy of punch left, right? And this is what Starmer's been doing since becoming Labour leader. If you don't like it, there's the door. Well, people will take that door. So you've got a problem, which is you haven't locked down the swing voters who can punish you at the ballot box. And you've also told your base to go fuck themselves. What are you going to be left with? So there is that real absence of strategy, I think, because I think they only had one strategy, which was establish credibility by distancing yourself from the party's left flank. And then you talked about the sort of like Biden-esque element of it. And one of the things I talk about in the afterword is that one of the biggest indicators for whether or not you were going to vote for Trump in 2024 was, were you really worried about your household finances? And this is the problem with a line go up mentality. And you had all these, Democrat surrogates going on CNN, Fox News going, but look, line go up. Why aren't you happy? Line go up. And it's a fundamental misreading of how people experience economic precarity and anxiety. Because unless your pay is keeping up with the rate of inflation, things are still just getting more expensive. And you've also had to swallow a huge spike in your cost of living because of that 2021, 2022 inflationary crisis that was experienced across the board. And you can't just, and as journalists, I think sometimes we fall into this trap, is that we experience the world as text sometimes. We go, well, look, the words say this, and so this must be how people are experiencing it. Until you have to put back a big bottle of cooking oil because you can't afford it, you're not going to know that very visceral sense of anger and disappointment and disenchantment with the status quo.
I think on the afterward, the idea of the time that book was written is kind of, you're without the Polanski Green Party, you're without that. We can talk about your party later on as well.
Hey, my party.
And this surge of support for reform, it's before Rupert Lowe's new party comes out. And once the left starts to develop this material politics and good communications on how they're going to counteract the policies of the Labour Party or fight to bring them back towards the left, it seems to coincide with this kind of high watermark for reform. And I wonder if there's a part of the anger that turns into hope when there's a constructive alternative rather than apportioning blame to others.
So I think in terms of hope, I mean, what you need is something to get behind. And one of the things about reform voters is that I think there's anger, and I think there's also a kind of optimism that comes from, we can give these guys a punch in the nose. And I know that because that's how I feel when progressive options are doing well. And when I look at, Hannah Spencer and Gorton and Denton, or, Mamdani when he won the Democratic primary especially, I know that feeling of Schadenfreude as well. So I wouldn't want to polarize as like, oh, if you support reform, you're being driven by retribution. And if you support a progressive option, that's because you believe in hope and optimism. No, I am also a hater. Like I'm just a hater on the left. So I'd be wary of drawing too neat a dividing line. I mean, one of the things which I talk about in the afterword is one of my colleagues, Rivka Brown, went to one of the asylum protests and was interviewing people there who were there to protest. And she was talking to a woman who said, all these people who are like really running the country, it's BlackRock, it's this, it's that. So pointing at these, huge global, oligarchic landlords, which I talk about in the 7th chapter of the book, as saying like these guys are really to blame. But then when Rivka sort of pushed her a bit, she just went back to talking about immigration. And this is something which is borne out in some of the focus group work that's been done with reform supporters, which is there is a lot of that materialist analysis that they share in terms of, like, here are these corporations and companies, they belong to nowhere, they sort of span national borders, and they just sort of sit like a big spider, like sucking up money. But they don't feel that it's realistic for any government to take them on. But what does feel realistic is cracking down on immigration. And so when you think about what's a possible left strategy, and this is where there's potentially a bit of a tension for Zach Polanski, is that on the one hand, if you want to pull together the anti-reform coalition, one way in which you do that is you sort of make inclusive immigration a sort of lightning rod, right? And you want it to be really visible. There's another way where you go, ooh, but if we want to peel off some of these reform voters, we want to decrease the salience of immigration and really increase the salience of like Palantir and BlackRock and Macquarie and all these, corporate baddies.
Mm-hmm. You talk about it in the book of the working class and the ability of, whether it's the media, whether it's politicians, to divide the working class based off of race, religion, whatever lines it might be, to avoid the class struggle and to engage in proper materialist politics. It feels like we're at a cusp of that now, where there's hints of this unification, or certainly maybe a green curiosity on the right of politics, where Reform are never going to talk about BlackRock or whatever other organization that's taking government contracts to prevent them from doing so. And there seems to be kind of a switch, not back to Labour, but to the alternative left rather than to the establishment left. How does politics in the UK exist in that multipolar world?
I mean, I suppose when it comes to electoral politics, there are some simple rules. And one is drum up the salience of the issues that benefit you, tamp down the salience of issues that don't. And that's one way of doing politics, right? Electoral politics isn't the only way of doing politics, but that's kind of just what you want to do. And so I don't think that you have to reinvent the wheel to do that. It's good for Polanski to talk about wealth taxes. It's bad for Polanski to talk about asylum seekers, right? Really, really simple rule. In terms of how do you turn it into something which is more meaningful, and this is different from electoral politics, because now we're talking about subject formation. How do you experience the world? How do you identify yourself? What are your values, et cetera, et cetera? Zach Polanski's done really well for the Greens. He can't fucking do everything. And this is where I'm really interested in what the Belgian Workers' Party are doing. Now, this is like kind of an album track of European left-wing parties, but they are polling second.
B-side.
Yeah, it's a real B-side. It's like real heads only into the PTB. And one of the things that's so interesting about them is that they started really small and grew very cautiously and deliberately, because what they wanted was a high level of alignment between its members. And you can't really do entryism in the Belgian Workers' Party because there's tiers of membership depending on how long you've been in there. So there is the sense that here is a strategy, we're dedicated to executing it, and we're not going to be beset by the volatile winds of day-to-day politics too much. And it's been a slow growth, but it's been really meaningful. And one of the principles that they operate under is that working class people don't trust politicians, and it's for a really good fucking reason. So you have to give people a reason to trust you before you ask for their vote. So they do stuff like run like medical clinics and all sorts of service provision for working class communities. And it does a few things, right? One is it establishes your legitimacy before you go and ask for something. Second thing is that it brings people together from different bits of the working class. And the third thing is that it builds a sort of class power that's outside of the electoral system. And I kind of think that if you're looking at left politics in this country, that's something which is really, really missing. Whether it's Corbynism or whether it's Zach Polanski, we sort of have this tendency to be like just one heave over first past the post and we'll get there. I mean, what do you think is going to happen when you get into power? You are going to be attacked from all sides of capital, right? Whether or not it's Richard Dearlove like leading a coup, don't sue me for libel, I'm joking. But like whether or not it's some sort of, aspect of the security apparatus, or whether it's something like the bond markets, you are going to come under a huge amount of pressure. So where are you building power outside of the parliamentary system? I think that's got to be a part of the consideration of what your strategy is going to be.
Do you think that might be something that is exacerbating the fall of someone like Labour, is that the step away from that kind of civic politics and belonging in communities to the McSweeney corporatization of the Labour Party, to take it into the business realm, the city realm, and leaving that gap and allowing things like the Reform Party to fester within like the to give legitimacy to arguments when Matt Goodwin loses the election and says, well, it's to do with the sectarian vote and it's because Hannah Spencer was talking in Urdu on a video. Like,
I love the Muslim sectarians voting for a party led by a gay Jewish man.
Well, this is precisely it. I think that more than anything seems to be kind of where the book begins like, when was it, 2024 when you're writing it, that you now in February 2026, you've got a co-deputy leader of the party from the Muslim community, a southern co-deputy leader, and a gay Jewish man from Hackney, and vegan at that as well, if the rest of it wasn't woke enough. Then the claim being that the Muslim vote is what got them over the line in that community.
I mean, it's also, this is also kind of my big criticism of identity politics in general, is that it requires you to look at people through a very narrow lens and make assumptions that identity is always going to work in a particular way. The fact is that people are able to rank and prioritize what's important to them. All right. If you are super duper strict and really traditional when it comes to sexual norms and mores, you're probably not going to vote for Zach Polanski. But there are going to be people who are, like most religious people are, regardless of whether you are, you know, Muslim or Orthodox, Jewish or Catholic or whatever. If you're super duper religious, there tends to be a set of beliefs around sex. But you might go, well, that's less important to me than something else. Could be Gaza, could be cost of living, could be housing, could be whatever. Whereas the lens of identity politics, whether it's the identity politics of the right or whether it's the liberal identity politics that got really embraced by the left, is that it requires you to just see this is working the same way every time. And people don't work like that. And it's always worth remembering that I don't want to say this in a disparaging way because I don't mean it in a disparaging way, but most people don't have a coherent set of politics, by which I mean they're not going, how does this line up with that? And is this uniformly left-wing or is this uniformly right-wing? Like I can give you an example. I was talking to this woman in 2019 in Milton Keynes when I was out canvassing. I was pissing it down with rain, knock on the door. And this woman opens it. She's got these hench dogs, right? Like they look like they're guarding the gates of hell. And I was like, oh my God. And I was like, oh, you know, I see you're an animal lover. You know, Jeremy Corbyn wants to ban animal testing. And she was like, yeah, you know, too right. Like animals are defenseless, you know, they're innocents. How could we hurt them in this way? And I was like,
especially Fluffy and Spike.
Especially Fluffy and Spike. And I was like, oh my God, have I just won over a voter? Like feeling really good. And then she was like, yeah, they should test it on prisoners instead. And I was like, oh, I don't know how to tell you that Jeremy Corbyn is not going to do that. Like, he's not going to do that. But, like, the point I'm making is that, like, we have all these assumptions about what it means to be coherent. For her, she's like, no, this makes perfect sense to me in terms of my landscape of values. And everyone's like that, whether you're white, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Hindu, no matter what you are, you have what you experience as a coherent realm of principles and values. And it's the weirdos who are full-time in politics who don't get it.
Do you think that there's an aspect of that that's like the flaw in reforms politics, that they've kind of in some way adopted too much of the liberal identity politics where it's, I mean, a reform candidate will sit here and say that we're far more, we have policies that are far more in depth than stop the boats. But it seems that a lot of their net is cast through that lens. And when you see like the loss in Gorton and Denton, there is kind of an aspect of cope about it. And then when it comes to Rupert Lowe with the announcement, whatever it was, I can't remember. It was the shadow cabinet announcement where the discourse on X then became a Rupert Lowe-led thing of like, well, look, they are actually soft on the grooming gangs. Whereas this party has decided that they're going to be the primo spokesperson for grooming gang scandals. The identity politics seem to be successful up until a point.
I mean, the thing is that my theory, and I might not be right about this is just pure speculation, is I think that Matt Goodwin got picked for Gorton and Denton because they didn't think he'd win it. And I think that was a way of neutralising a potential rival later down the line for party leader.
Right, okay.
So that's my theory. Because, you know, you take this guy who's a talking head who is being pulled further and further towards the ethno-nationalist side of the far right as opposed to the civic nationalist side that Farage sees himself as operating on. And then you go, all right, here's a seat which is 30% Muslim. It's not really going to work, is it? It's not really going to work. So that's my little conspiracy, because also the way in which Reform selects their candidates, it's not like there is a branch membership who gets to vote and blah, 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 blah. That's basically, I think, a committee of 7 of the head honchos who get to decide. So that's my theory, is that I think they set Goodwin up for a bad loss. In terms of the drift towards ethno-nationalism, right, is that Farage is a very strategic man. And if you think about what he was doing about a year ago, he was making all these signals that he was going to embrace a degree of left-tinged populism for his economic programme. So he was talking about nationalising British Steel, nationalising Thames Water. Richard Tice popped up at a couple of trade union policy paper launches. And you can see the strategy there, right? He's like, if I look at what the biggest cohort of the electorate is, it's people who are a bit left on economics and right-wing on immigration. So that's where we're going to position ourselves. Now they've got a problem if they've got a competitor to their right flank, and they've become a halfway house for disgraced former Tory MPs and ministers. And I do think that that's possibly muddying, diluting, weakening their strategy. And they've got another problem as well, which is they're going to go into 2029 having run some councils already. And they've already had to put up council tax by the top whack after running on a programme of tax cuts. So unless Farage is able to re-establish the dominance of the strategy that he wants to pursue, I think that he's going to have a problem of looking Tory on the economy, which very few people want, ethno-nationalist on issues of race, culture and belonging, which not many people in this country want. And they've gone in with some stories of reform-run council failures, which is sort of a bit of an incumbency problem. So I think it's a tricky time to be a Reform.
There's also, you touched on it there, of it becoming the halfway house, like the
Nadeem Zahawi.
Well, yeah, or even Robert Jenrick. Like anybody that is a Reform MP now has apart from who is there in their parliamentary party that hasn't got ties to the Conservative Party at some point? But you've gotten that kind of surge last May and in 2024 off of being more ethno-nationalist than the Tories, kind of ambiguous on the economy. But now, because you've had that diversity of opinion of there are you looked at it in 2024 where you could see the constituencies that Labour were winning and Reform were second in a lot of them, where it's not necessarily a case that those people that are voting Reform are racist. It's that there's a policy that seems a little bit left-leaning or a little bit more Labour than a Labour policy under Keir Starmer. Is a safe place for politics to be, whether it's the local or the national, where the right of politics is so volatile and the left of politics seems to be on a resurgence or
I just don't know when politics was ever safe. There's a theorist called Roger Griffith who wrote about fascism and came up with the very famous definition of fascism. And one of the things that he says is look, slavery happened under formal democracy. A live stream genocide is going on, waged by a formal democracy. I mean, Netanyahu can be voted out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this idea of thinking about some kind of golden era of democratic norms, separate from political conflicts, has never really existed. Bad things happen in democracies. It doesn't automatically mean they're fascistic. And also thinking about a golden age, it maybe never really existed. So that's my thinking about it. Is not, is this a safe place for politics to be? Is that politics has never really been safe. What is certainly up for grabs is the potentially permanent destruction of a two-party duopoly in Westminster. And it may have already happened. It may have already happened. And so for me, I tend not to interpret it through the lens of safety. I mean, you had a really solid two-party duopoly, and then, in the early 2000s, which you would sort of consider, the golden age of Blairism and the end of history, and then bam, war in Iraq.
Mm-hmm. One of the aspects of the book that has been kind of the thing that I keep coming back to, is the identity politics aspect and the grievance politics, and how these things kind of, the chipping away at that kind of culture since Trump 2.0, and how kind of the environment where the book was written and the political landscape globally at that point was kind of, what next? Where do we go from here? And I wonder what you think of the kind of how that kind of the corporate wokeness co-opted left-wing politics, and the absence of that has kind of spurred on a new movement, or?
I mean, yeah, you've got a sort of interesting thing, which is, you know, ad agencies and like, you know, PR giants sort of scrambling for the end of woke. And then for a while it was like, put Sydney Sweeney on everything. Right? Just put her on everything. And I almost felt, there was a degree to which I felt sorry for her. It was like she was being turned into this, you know, dead-eyed poster girl
the
for
MAGA totem, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, that can't be a pleasant place to be. But that was certainly a sort of corporate response to feeling like the culture had changed. I think that the part of the left that I'm on is certainly a lot more willing to look at the failures of that and be like, how do we build a different kind of political culture? That doesn't mean it's gone. And I would say that one of the ways in which Zara Sultana has navigated political conflict within your party has been to draw for the identity politics playbook now and then. But that's certainly shifting. Where you still see this, you know, intersectional Olympics taking place, a lot of the time it's in the charity sector and the NGO sector. Like, it's so embedded there. And I think that there is a sort of...
What do you put that down to? Is it like the hyper-specific of like the NGO sector, of like this organization deals with this one group of people, and we focus all of our attention and all of our resource on ensuring the best for them?
It's not even that. It's within the offices itself.
Okay.
So when you're thinking about hiring, when you're thinking about workplace culture, when you're thinking about the way in which war is waged via HR, all of this stuff is very, very inflected by identity politics. I mean, there was a sort of time where if you wanted money from a big liberal funder, it's like, you better find your disabled woman of color and like get her up there now, because I think maybe it's something to do with how established and powerful liberal NGOs are in America. That becomes part of the culture over here as well in NGOs and big funders. You know, thinking about that journey through higher education, the encountering of identity politics when you're at uni, and then what happens when you enter the labour market and you start making your way, you know, as Gramsci might have said, a long march through the institutions, and what happens to the institutions. But it's still super duper embedded in that kind of space. And maybe that's not such a bad thing for the left to have to remember that it was never an extension of the NGO industrial complex, that it's a separate kind of political organisation, and that we're not part of the charity sector or something else.
I'm interested in what you were saying about the culture aspect of it, whether it's Sydney Sweeney, the Manosphere, whatever it might be. The idea that the narrative that's pushed by corporates, or the narrative that's embraced by corporates, is so malleable and can change so quickly depending on what the authoritative voice in the White House or in wherever it might be. Since last year, since the book came out, it feels like there's the through line, it seems to me, is that there's a slow chipping away of like the liberal identity politics and a building of the identity politics of the right that seems to be a little bit more anemic than the kind of the reinforced, whether it's, I don't know, the meme of the hijabi woman with the peg leg and the hook, to now being a thing of, well, I'm scared because I might get my Rolex mugged from me on the streets of London. It's
Skill
terrifying out here. Yeah.
Skill issue, mate.
Just run.
Yes. What's wrong with you?
But for people that are not so convicted in the politics of the right, it seems that it's easier to call it grift, call it just like the idea of learning from the past. But it seems like the mistakes of the liberal identity politics don't seem to have been learned to the point where it's Sydney Sweeney on a jeans ad, or it's Donald Trump going on Joe Rogan, or these things that don't actually have much substance apart from creating outrage.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is that, outrage always has a sort of diminishing returns because you exhaust people, right? And one of the things which I'm really interested in is the way in which being constantly stimulated to outrage becomes indistinguishable from a state of paralysis. And I think that that's the sort of ideological job of big social media platforms. I think it has a pacifying effect overall because you're so hyper stimulated all the time that you actually can't do anything. I mean, like, I'm a social media addict. I don't want to assume that you are too, but like, you work in media, so there you go. And when you just feel sort of like dead and a bit fucked because you've been scrolling too much. The purpose of a system is what it does. Like, that's a feature, not a glitch. And so I think that the right obviously risks doing that to their own supporters as well. In terms of how they're drawing the boundaries of identity, I mean, this is what I find so funny about Restore. Like, I genuinely find them quite jokes because, you've got this like Zoomer streamer dude popping up and he's just like, what it means to be British is, indigenous ancestry, white, and being Christian. Now, if you look at the overall religiosity of the UK, you can't really have both those things. There's like 5 white Christians left, all right? Like,
and they're all in Restore.
Right, and they're all in Restore, right? If you really want to go hard on like Britain as a Christian country, call some Nigerians, fam, because like they're London is one of the only places getting more religious, and that's because of immigration. So there is a sort of risk of, if you become too led by your hyper-engaged social media flank, that you become really disconnected from what people actually think and how they actually view themselves. And that's as true for the right as it is the left. In terms of the cultural aspect and the manosphere, I mean, this isn't in the book because I'm kind of thinking if whether or not this would be a second project or whether or not this is just a bugbear, and I'm going to just bring it up opportunistically. But the whole thing about 80% of women go for 20% of men.
Yeah.
In real life, we know that's not true, right? In real life, we know that a funny motherfucker can get really far through the dating pool if he wants to, right? Like, Danny DeVito type beat.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, you can do really, really well. Where it is true is on the dating apps. It's absolutely true on the dating apps. And this has a relationship to what I'm talking about in terms of the need to decommodify and thinking about protecting the commons and that which is a product of the free association of human beings from market forces and commodification. Because the gamified aspect of dating apps, right? Super alienated, right? You're swiping by yourself. So it's not like being in like a bar or a pub or a club where there's a value to being there, even if you don't get the chirps. Like, you should be having fun anyway. For a dating app, it's single purpose. You do it by yourself. You are constantly anticipating and experiencing rejection. And it's also really alienating from your own desire. Like, how are you supposed to know if you fancy someone? It's just based off a picture. So if you are like that Danny DeVito type guy, how are you supposed to do well? Because how can anyone tell that you're funny? So the manosphere type grievance, I think a lot of that emerges from what has happened to modern dating. And they blame it on feminism. And I'm saying, well, no, because if you get out there with real women, I mean, like, I've also seen absolutely gorgeous women with guys who are not rich, not hot, and sometimes not even funny, right? Like, there's a lot of low self-esteem out there.
What's happening there then?
Oh, my God. You're like, do you have their numbers? But like, we know that that's how it works in real life, but that grievance is coming from the way in which we've been alienated by each other from this like hyper-consumerist, hyper-commodified world. And I think that that's the case with a lot of what the right is picking up as its grievances, is that the left can sometimes be like, well, you've got nothing to complain about because you're a man. I'm like, no, that's a real thing to complain about, but who's to blame is different.
That's interesting. I'm just thinking of the dynamics of the, I guess, disparagingly, but not meant the hopeless chud that can't get a date, can't get a like his friends don't want to socialize in real life. It's a gaming culture. It's versus the left of it, where at times there seems to be more community around it, but there is also kind of, especially in the online space, there's a commodification of not only grievance, but I guess knowledge about the topic that you're aggrieved about, or how many stories you can share on this thing, or how many likes you can get on your protest photo, rather than joining the civic organization and organizing and trying to make a material change, right? Which I guess in some ways is kind of something, there's something in that about your party, I think, where there is kind of a feeling of community, and it exists by, and it does manifest itself physically as well as in the online space. But I think maybe there's an aspect of it where the online space has kind of attributed to the polarization within that movement.
I mean, so to talk about the first bit, I think what you're talking about there is the way in which the attention economy has transformed all of us. So one of the things which I try and do in the book is that rather than just being like, we've all spontaneously become shit at doing politics, I'm like, well, no, because the real life spaces of left-wing organisation were deliberately attacked and dismantled, whether it's the trade union movement, heavy industry, the sort of attendant social world around heavy industry, council housing, or the infiltration and disruption of, you know, whether it's the Black Panther Party or Italian communists, whatever you care to mention. All of these things atomized and weakened the left. And then you add onto that social media and the mediatization of experience through screens, is that all of those tendencies of atomization and isolation are just super amplified, and you're put into a system which forces you into competition with others for attention. And so that really shapes what identity politics is, right? You start doing this absurd thing, and you saw this with the BAFTAs discourse around John Davidson and Michael B. Jordan and Delroy Lindo, is that it became this online competition of what's worse, racism or ableism. You know, I was like, look, it's feeling a bit Alien versus Predator, like maybe both things are bad.
Yeah.
And also maybe no one's really to blame for this shit thing that's happened. But that's what social media forces us into. And I do think that that impacted your party. But what I would say is this, is that I think that your party was predominantly a failure of leadership and a product of its dysfunctional leadership. And I would actually put the origins of that in the Labour Party, because that leadership cadre and the two leaders at the heart of it, Jeremy Corbyn and Zara Sultana, they're products of a Labour Party way of doing things. And anyone who's been in the Labour Party can tell you it's such a factional beast. Like, if you want to be treasurer for your local constituency party, you have to win like a knife fight. Like, it's so brutal. And not just brutal between right and left, right? All kinds of factions. So if you get anywhere and you're selected as a candidate, it means that you have managed to navigate that. And you've been trained like at the Wudan temple, right? You come out like Michelle Yeoh, like you're really, really good at factional warfare. And so here they are trying to start a party together. And I do believe Zara Sultana when she says that she was being excluded and forced out and power was being consolidated by the other faction. I believe that that's true. I also think that the way that she responded to that by making all these huge unilateral moves and not waiting for a membership to come into play, absolutely blew up whatever trust there could be. And it was fascinating to me the way that she would invoke being a working class Muslim woman of colour as a don't ask me questions about my political strategy. Like when her back was up against the wall, she was reaching for identity politics. And so then what happens underneath that is that you have established a really negative, really hostile, deeply paranoid, and very moralizing political culture. So that's what the membership are coming into. And I think that there are your party branches which seem to be doing really good stuff, which seem to be lively, which seem to have like a good political culture. What I hear about the Your Party branch in Stoke is actually like really positive, and people have been working really hard on making it good. But that isn't uniform across the national picture. And what's happening in terms of social media is ugly. Like the way in which people are talking to each other is absolutely hideous. And so for me, I don't think you can come back from that kind of political culture. And so my prediction is that I think that your party as a national project is dead. But where you have these really good branches, not only can that be useful locally, so thinking about independent campaigns or forms of community organising which establish really deep roots, but those sedimentary networks can always go on to do something really good. So like Novara Media is the product of a failure. Like we are the product of the student movement, but it established sedimentary networks which went on to do something else.
That was going to be my follow-up question, was kind of the idea of your party, how it manifests online versus how it could develop as a civic organization or developing working class politics through different communities and how it I think that's kind of what the idea they're getting at the moment is endorsing candidates in certain constituencies and expanding their network and trying to develop grassroots organizations in different places where they may not exist yet. But I wonder how you rectify the operations or the discourse online with the physical manifestation that seems to be a more wholesome affair than what carries out online.
I mean, look, there's also, and this is me declaring some of my biases and prejudices, which because I'm experiencing politics through a screen by being on social media, is that that's going to warp my perception of stuff hugely. So I'm always going to tend towards taking the temperature of something by social media than seeing what's going on in real life because I spend too much time glued to my phone. In terms of like how you can inoculate yourself from that kind of social media culture, I mean, there's no substitute for logging off. Like there really isn't. And it's like, when someone says it feel better, go to the gym, and it's actually true. Like, I'm sorry, it's true. You will feel better if you log off, and you'll be able to build a better political culture. The problem is that if you want to have a kind of national footprint when the entirety of politics has become so mediatized and you don't have social media presence, that's going to be very, very difficult. So I think that you kind of have to make a bit of a choice, which is, do you want to focus on building a healthy grassroots political culture from the ground up, or do you want to do a sort of like big populist intervention? I think that the time for big populist national intervention is gone. And part of that is to do with the rise of the Greens as well. So for your party to be useful, I think it's going to have to, in some ways, become a less visible force.
Ash, I feel like I could speak for hours to you, but before I close off, I've one more thing, and it feels like, I mean, we've been talking about kind of the how social media just destroys the kind of the health of your brain, right? The defining, what seems to be one of the defining news stories of this year, possibly for the decade to come, is the Epstein files. And I wonder, in terms of the kind of the themes of the book of how we divide communities on, or how the establishment might divide communities to ensure the consolidation of power for the super wealthy, the super influential, and seeing in black and white all of those people that have been exercising that power in maintaining this division on the ground are implicated in one of the grandest conspiracies that I think people on the left would never have thought existed. People on the right are probably saying, I've been saying this since 2010, that there is
people on the right were like, I was at that party.
Yeah. But just in terms of the anger and how it manifests into mobilization, what do you think the findings of it? Let's just talk about the British context of the Prince Andrew, Peter Mandelson.
We've got to supply our allegedlys now because it's a sub
Well, yeah, of course.
So, yeah.
Well, the alleged association with Jeffrey Epstein, but the black and white of them being in the files. How does that affect the politics of the working class in future?
I mean, so one of the things which is really key is I think that Brass Eyes Pedogeddon was one of the most insightful works of comedy in terms
British
of laying
Isles,
bare, like,
more like pedophiles.
you know what I mean? Like, this paedophile disguised himself as a school. Like, there is something about our completely correct and justified moral disgust, which also is this sort of like weird fascination. And there is something about that which, I don't know, it really just like goes to the heart of Brits. Like, it really, really goes to the heart of us. And so I think that element means that the story can't really go away, because while there have been many, many kinds of corruption scandals, right, whether it's lobbying scandals or tax avoidance, whatever else, it hasn't been combined with this sort of very visceral preoccupation, which is paedophilia. So I think that's just one thing, which is like, this is not going to go away because of that fact. The second thing is that you have to look at the corruption, the allegations of confidential and market-sensitive information being leaked, these very cozy relationships between, banking CEOs and titans of industry and Jeffrey Epstein. It is inseparable from sexual exploitation. So the sharing of young girls, women, maybe others as well, and the deliberate creation of an environment where it felt like there were no boundaries, right? And so you were freed from the confines of ordinary norms and mores was essential, I think, for creating a sense of an in-group, and we're all in this together. So obviously, supplying all of my allegedly Peter Mandelson leaked market-sensitive information. But even if this one instance wasn't criminal, which is him advising Jamie Dimon, who was the CEO of JP Morgan, to lightly threaten then Chancellor Alistair Darling over attacks on bankers' bonuses, and doing that via Jeffrey Epstein, is that my opinion is that feeling of we're all on the same side was effectively lubricated by what some may have understood as mere sexual permissiveness and libertinism, but what we actually know to be exploitation and trafficking.
Mm-hmm. Outside of you could sit down and read those files for the rest of your life and get deeper and deeper into the despair of the I guess, without it being a reflection of the people that are implicated in the files, the idea of this grand conspiracy of elites operating on a higher level than the rest of society. And that's kind of where my thought is on it, is that the left and right of politics, in terms of the electorate, are seeing their darlings, or these titans of industry or banking, of whoever it might be, inside or outside of a global ring of sex trafficking and paedophilia. This two-tier system, and this idea of there being an inaccessible upper crust and you're below that. I'm wondering, is there a point where there's a switch in the division and there's a realization that we are being divided?
I mean, it sort of depends on how you understand the story, right? And so one of the things about the sexual aspect is that, in a way, it risks sort of uniquely pathologizing and sort of being like, well, the problem is pedophiles rather than the problem is, corruption, of which sex becomes an inevitable dimension, because that's kind of how you create a sense of shared identity and purpose. In terms of the conspiracy element of it, one of the things which I find really, really funny is that whenever you talk to like a lobby journalist or like someone who's very sensible at the BBC, is that they'll always go, well, we have a choice between thinking of this as cock-up or conspiracy. And in my experience, cock-up is always more likely. They always downplay the element of conspiracy. Now, number one, conspiracies fucking do happen. Like, what do you think people are doing behind closed doors, right? They're not just like playing whist, all right? like they are striving to carry out a strategy of their own design, right? Everybody in politics is. Everyone in power is. So conspiracies do happen. And then the second thing is that there is a missing C, which is class interests, which is people who understand themselves to be a class and who have shared interests in some way, even though they're in competition with one another because of the market. What trumps the competition of the market is shared class interest and working in concert together. And that's something which you never, ever hear mentioned as part of an editorial framing on the BBC or Channel 4, or The Guardian or The Times. And it's, I think, really essential to understanding why society works in the way that it does. And this is sort of the point of the book, is that I wanted to meet people where they were, but sort of like slowly convey about them towards a Marxist analysis. So even if you're not a political Marxist, you go, all right, how I understand society is going, what's the balance of class forces? Because everything else I'm seeing in terms of politics, media, culture is an expression of that balance of class forces. And so I think you see that with the Epstein files, which is how do people behave when they understand themselves to be of a shared class with shared interests? Well, Lolita Express, Epstein Island, that's how they behave.
Sarkar, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
I believe you're on your way to Cardiff now.
I'm always Cardiff.
To speak to the old sensei, Ollie Dugmore.
Yeah, no, do you miss him?
Miss is a strong word. I'm actually seeing him this weekend, funnily enough. But Minority Rule, paperback is out now.
Yep.
You are going away to Australia for a tour of the book, is that right?
I'm speaking at a conference about the book at Progress Conference in Melbourne, which is going to be sick.
Great.